she said. Without me, you're nothing. A year later, she was knocking on my office door, asking for a job. Yeah, that's how it all started. When people hear that line, they laugh like it's just a movie plot. But for me, it was real, painfully real. So before I tell you what happened next, make sure you hit that subscribe button, leave a like, and drop a comment below, because sometimes life writes stories you couldn't make up if you tried. Her name was Rachel. We'd been married for 6 years. I met her when I was still trying to get my first startup off the ground. She worked in marketing, sharp, ambitious, and always dressed like she had somewhere better to be. From the very beginning, she made it clear she liked men with potential. And I guess that's what I was back then. All potential, no results. I worked late nights at the dining room table, laptop glowing while she watched her favorite shows in the other room. At first, she'd bring me coffee, tell me she believed in me. But over time, the tone changed. The coffee stopped coming. The words became sharper. You're always chasing ideas, she'd say, but ideas don't pay bills. I'd just nod and go back to typing, pretending it didn't cut as deep as it did. One night, we were at a dinner party with some of her coworkers, people from her firm, the kind that wear confidence like perfume. They talked about vacations in Greece, promotions, new cars. I sat there, smiling politely, sipping my drink, while Rachel told them, he's working on something big. One of the guys, slick hair, gold watch, laughed and said, that what you call unemployment these days? Everyone chuckled. Even Rachel smirked. That moment stuck in my head like a splinter. I didn't say anything. I just let it burn quietly inside. A few weeks later, I found out she'd applied for a new position in another city. She hadn't told me. When I confronted her, she shrugged like it was nothing. I didn't think you'd care, she said. It's not like you'd come with me. You're too married to your dream. That night, we argued for hours. She called me selfish, unrealistic, and when I tried to explain that I just needed time, she cut me off with that line that would echo for months. Without me, you're nothing. I made you who you are. You wouldn't last a week without me. Then she walked out. For the first few days, I kept expecting her to come back. The apartment felt hollow without her. Empty coffee cups, clothes still hanging in the closet, her perfume fading from the air. I wanted to call, to beg her to give us another chance, but pride held me back. And maybe that was the first sign of change. Because for once, I didn't chase someone who'd already decided to leave. I just sat there in silence, staring at my reflection in the dark window, realizing she might have been right. Maybe I really was nothing without her. But there's a strange thing about hitting bottom. You stop fearing the fall. I went through those first few months like a man possessed, sleepless nights, endless rejections, surviving on caffeine and cheap takeout. I maxed out credit cards, lost clients, came close to losing everything. But then something shifted. An old college friend, Marcus, reached out. He'd seen one of my old proposals floating online, a concept for an automated logistics platform. He said his company was looking for someone to develop something similar, and he could get me in the door if I still had the fire. I didn't hesitate. I dusted off my old laptop, pulled out those forgotten blueprints, and worked like a man who had something to prove, not to her, but to myself. For weeks, I barely slept. My apartment turned into a war zone of whiteboards, notes, and energy drink cans. I remember one night sitting on the floor, surrounded by sketches and code, whispering to myself, she's wrong. She's wrong. Marcus kept his word. I landed the contract. It wasn't huge, but it was a start, enough to pay off some debts and hire 2 freelancers. One of them, a quiet programmer named Olivia, became instrumental in everything that followed. She believed in the project when I was still doubting every step. We worked side by side for months, and when we finally launched, something unexpected happened. It took off. The platform didn't just work, it solved real problems for real companies. Within 6 months, I had clients calling from across the country. The money came slower than the recognition, but it came. Investors started circling. I expanded the team, rented an office, built a brand. And every time I walked into that office, I remembered the night Rachel told me I'd never make it. It didn't hurt anymore, it fueled me. I wasn't chasing success out of anger now. I was chasing it out of clarity. For the first time, I was becoming exactly who I was meant to be, and it had nothing to do with her. But life has a funny way of looping back when you least expect it. A year after she left, I was sitting in that same office, reviewing resumes for a new management role. We'd just acquired a smaller firm, and we were restructuring their staff. HR sent over a list of internal applicants for transfer. I was half distracted, sipping coffee, scrolling through the names, until I saw one that made my hand freeze midair. Rachel Mitchell. My heart kicked once hard. I stared at the screen, reading the name again. Same spelling. Same email domain as her old company, the one we just bought. I sat back in my chair, a slow smile forming. The irony was almost cinematic. I didn't say a word to anyone. I just waited. Because I knew sooner or later, she'd walk through that door, not as my wife, not as my critic, but as a job applicant. And when that day came, I'd be ready. The morning of her interview came like any other, but I could feel something different in the air. I arrived at the office early, as usual, and the sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting sharp lines across the polished wood. Everything about that space represented what I'd built from scratch, the proof that her words had been nothing more than noise. The company had grown fast. We were now one of the fastest expanding logistics tech startups in the region. There were days I still couldn't believe it. Every meeting, every investor call, every signed contract was a silent victory. But that morning, none of it mattered as much as the name I'd seen on that HR list. Rachel Mitchell, the woman who said I was nothing without her. The woman who had laughed at my dreams. I didn't tell anyone she was my ex-wife. Not even Olivia, who was now my operations director. She'd earned her place beside me, and I trusted her with everything. Except this. I wanted the moment to unfold naturally, without warning, without the weight of anticipation. Around 10, I heard the faint sound of heels clicking down the hallway, the rhythm painfully familiar. My heart kicked once, not from love, but from memory. The door opened slightly as my assistant knocked. "Sir, your next interview is here, Rachel Mitchell." I looked up, forcing a calm smile. "Send her in." The door swung open, and time folded in on itself. She stepped inside, every bit as polished as I remembered. Perfectly tailored blazer, subtle makeup, hair pulled back in that tight, confident style she'd always worn when she wanted control. But the confidence didn't quite reach her eyes this time. There was something brittle there, like she'd learned to smile through disappointment. She didn't see me at first. Her attention was on the view behind me, the city skyline stretching endlessly across the glass. "Nice office," she said softly, almost to herself. Then her gaze shifted and froze. The color drained from her face as she realized who was sitting behind the desk. "Ethan," she breathed. For a second, she looked like she'd seen a ghost. I didn't move, didn't speak. I just watched her, letting the silence stretch long enough for every memory to crash through her mind. "It's been a while," I said finally. My voice was steady, detached, the kind of tone reserved for business meetings, not reunions. She blinked hard, trying to regain her composure. I didn't know you were," she started, but couldn't finish the sentence. I leaned back in my chair. "The owner," I said, with the faintest smile. "Yeah, things change." She nodded slowly, still processing. "I had no idea this was your company. The merger happened so fast. I just applied through the internal portal." I could see her trying to piece it together, trying to rewrite history in her head. "So," she said finally, forcing a laugh that didn't sound real. "You made it." I looked her straight in the eye. "Looks like." She shifted in her seat, her fingers fidgeting with the edge of her folder. The silence between us was thick. I could almost hear her heartbeat in the quiet. "Well," she said finally, clearing her throat, "maybe we can pretend this isn't awkward." "I don't think we need to pretend," I replied. She looked at me, confusion flashing across her face, unsure whether I meant it as a jab or a statement of fact. The truth was, I wasn't angry anymore. I didn't feel the fire I once did. What I felt was something colder, closure. She began explaining her resume, talking about her experience, her responsibilities, her goals. Her voice wavered slightly at first, but then steadied, slipping into that professional tone she used to impress people. I listened, quietly, taking it all in. The same confidence that once intimidated me now sounded rehearsed, mechanical. When she finished, I nodded slowly. "You've done well," I said. "It's clear you've worked hard." Relief flickered in her expression, maybe thinking I'd forgotten everything. But then I leaned forward, elbows on the desk, and added, "Funny thing, though. I remember when you told me I wouldn't last a week without you." Her lips parted slightly, eyes widening. "Ethan, that was years ago," she said quickly. People say things in anger. You weren't angry, I said. You were certain. She looked down, cheeks flushing. I was wrong, she admitted quietly. You've clearly proven that. The words hung in the air, heavier than they sounded. I studied her for a moment, not to gloat, not to savor it, but to understand how far I'd come. Rachel, I said after a pause, this company is built on second chances. People who failed once, learned, and came back stronger. I respect that journey. She looked up hopefully, her eyes softening. So, does that mean? It means, I interrupted gently. We hire people who've learned humility, who understand that no one creates someone else. Success comes from within. The message wasn't lost on her. She nodded slowly, trying to keep her composure. I understand, she said. And for what it's worth, I'm proud of you. I smiled faintly. You should be. The interview ended there. I stood up, offered my hand. She hesitated before taking it, her fingers trembling slightly. The same hands that once pointed at me in anger now felt small, uncertain. Take care, Rachel, I said as she turned to leave. She paused at the door, looking back one last time. Ethan, she said softly, I didn't mean to hurt you. I met her gaze evenly. I know, but you did. And maybe that's what I needed. When the door closed, I exhaled slowly, the tension in my chest finally easing. I walked to the window, watching her cross the parking lot below, her figure small against the bright afternoon light. For the first time in years, I felt free, not because she'd been humbled, but because I no longer needed her validation. Still, something in me knew this wasn't the end. People like Rachel rarely fade quietly. They find ways to return, to test the balance. And part of me wondered, as I turned back to my desk, what would happen if she did. The days after that interview were strangely quiet. I didn't hear from Rachel, and I didn't expect to. But a week later, HR sent me an email with the final hiring recommendations for the positions we had open. One of them was hers. Against my better judgment, I opened the file and read through the notes. She had scored high on the technical evaluation, and her references spoke well of her. Olivia, my operations director, had even written a note. Strong candidate, experienced, but seems overly formal in conversation. I stared at the line for a long time. Overly formal. That was Rachel all over. Professional, distant, trying to sound composed while hiding the cracks underneath. I thought about rejecting her application outright. It would have been easy. No explanations, no confrontations, just one click and she'd be gone from my orbit forever. But something held me back. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was the part of me that wanted to see what humility looked like on her face. Or maybe I just wanted to prove to myself that I could handle seeing her again, this time on my terms. So I approved the hire. No special treatment, no warnings to anyone. She started the following Monday. The morning she walked into the office as an employee, not a partner, the shift in power was almost surreal. I was in the middle of a team meeting when I saw her through the glass wall, standing at reception with her new ID badge clipped neatly to her blazer. The same woman who once walked out on me now stood waiting for instructions from my staff. Olivia greeted her warmly and led her to her desk. I watched for a moment, unnoticed, before returning to the meeting. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about observation, seeing what time and consequence had done to her. For the first few weeks, she kept her distance. She avoided my office unless it was absolutely necessary, communicated through emails, and treated me with the kind of respect that came wrapped in tension. She was efficient, professional, and surprisingly humble. She never mentioned our past, never acted like we had shared a life. It was as if she'd built a wall inside herself to survive the awkwardness. And honestly, I respected that. I wasn't going to humiliate her or hold anything over her head. The simple fact that she worked under me was enough irony for a lifetime. Still, the universe has a strange sense of humor, because as the weeks went by, she began to show glimpses of the woman I once knew. The one who had ambition, drive, and fire. Except now, that fire didn't come from arrogance. It came from something closer to humility. One afternoon, Olivia and I were in a strategy session when Rachel knocked softly on the door. Sorry to interrupt, she said. I just finalized the report you asked for. Olivia smiled and motioned her in. Rachel placed the folder on the table, but her eyes flicked to me for half a second. It wasn't defiance this time, it was acknowledgement. Respect, maybe. Thank you, Rachel, I said, keeping my tone neutral. She nodded, almost relieved, and left the room. Olivia waited until the door closed before looking at me curiously. "You two know each other?" she asked. I smiled slightly. "You could say that." "How well?" she pressed, half joking. I just shook my head. "Well enough to know she's not the same person she used to be." Olivia didn't ask again. She was smart enough to read between the lines. Over the next few months, Rachel continued proving herself. She worked hard, often late, never complaining. I saw her chatting with coworkers, slowly earning their trust. There were moments when I caught her looking at me from across the room, like she wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. Once, after a long day, I was leaving the building when I saw her sitting alone in the break room, staring at her laptop. I hesitated at the door, then stepped in. "You're still here?" I asked. She looked up, startled, then smiled faintly. "Just finishing some numbers. Old habits die hard." "You used to say that about me?" I replied. She laughed softly. "Yeah, I guess I did." For a moment, the tension faded, replaced by something simpler. Two people who had shared too much history to stay strangers. But life never stays calm for long. A few weeks later, a major deal went sideways. A client misinterpreted data from one of Rachel's reports, and it caused a minor panic in the management chain. Olivia brought it to my attention immediately. "It's not a disaster," she said, "but it needs to be fixed before it blows up." When I called Rachel into my office, she looked nervous but composed. I handed her the file. "You know why you're here?" She nodded. "Yes, and I take full responsibility." I double-checked everything. The client just didn't read the disclaimer. "That may be true," I said evenly. "But responsibility doesn't end when you send an email. It ends when you make sure the message lands." She looked at me, a flicker of the old pride flashing behind her eyes, but it vanished as quickly as it came. "You're right," she said quietly. "I'll fix it." She worked overnight. By morning, the issue was resolved. She came to my office, handed me the updated report, and said simply, "It's done." I nodded. "Good work." She hesitated at the door. "Ethan," she said softly, "you didn't have to give me this job. I know that. And I don't know if you did it to make a point or to help me start over. Either way, thank you." I met her eyes. "Rachel, I didn't do it for you. I did it for me. To see if I could face the past without letting it control me." She smiled faintly, almost sadly. "I guess that's fair." After she left, I sat there for a long time, thinking about how full circle everything had become. She was right about one thing. She had been part of my story, but she had never written it. The pen had always been in my hand. I just hadn't realized it. There was no anger left in me, no bitterness, only perspective. Sometimes people need to lose you to see who you really were. And sometimes you need to lose them to see who you could become. Still, something about the situation lingered. She worked for me, yes, but the power dynamic had shifted into something more complicated. She wasn't the same woman who left me, and I wasn't the same man she had dismissed. Every interaction now carried a quiet awareness, not of revenge, but of reckoning. And as I watched her rebuild herself day by day, I couldn't help but wonder how she'd react when the final moment came. The day she would realize that fate didn't just turn the tables. It rebuilt them completely. The real turning point came almost a year after she started working for me. The company had grown fast, faster than I ever imagined. We were negotiating a massive contract with a Fortune 500 client that could double our annual revenue. It was the kind of deal people dream about, the kind that puts you on the map permanently. Everyone was working around the clock to get it across the line, and Rachel had been a crucial part of the project. She handled client relations, communications, reports, the same responsibilities she used to criticize me for struggling with when I was trying to make it alone. Except now, she wasn't criticizing. She was performing, delivering, proving that she could hold her own. I could tell she wanted to earn my respect back, even if she never said it out loud. But this deal would test everyone, especially her. A week before the final presentation, one of the clients made a last-minute change that threatened to throw months of work off track. Olivia called me in a panic late one night. "They're asking for full recalculations on the logistics metrics," she said. "If we can't present it by Monday, they'll walk." It was Friday. I looked through the reports, and I knew what it meant. Long nights, no sleep, and perfect precision. I went straight to the office and found Rachel there already, staring at her screen, exhaustion painted across her face. "You hurt?" I asked. She nodded without looking up. "I'm on it." For 2 days straight, she worked nonstop. I joined her, not because I had to, but because I wanted to see this through with her. We barely spoke. There was no need. The quiet hum of computers filled the office, the soft rustle of papers, the tapping of keys. It was almost nostalgic, like those early nights when I'd been building my dream from nothing. Except now, she was beside me instead of against me. On Sunday evening, just as the sky turned orange through the glass windows, she leaned back in her chair and whispered, "It's done." I checked her work. It was flawless. "You did good," I said. She smiled faintly, her eyes tired but proud. "Guess I finally proved something." "Not to me," I said quietly. "To yourself." She looked at me for a long moment, as if searching for something in my expression, and then just nodded. That was the first time since our marriage ended that the air between us felt completely clear. The presentation that Monday morning went perfectly. The clients were impressed, Olivia was ecstatic, and by noon, we had a signed agreement. It was the biggest success in our company's history. There was laughter, champagne, celebration. Rachel was there, standing with the team, smiling like she hadn't in years. When our eyes met across the room, she raised her glass slightly, not as an apology, not as a victory, but as acknowledgement. Later that afternoon, after everyone left, she knocked on my office door. "Do you have a minute?" she asked. "Sure," I said. She walked in, closing the door softly behind her. "I just wanted to say thank you," she began. "Not just for the job, but for everything. You didn't have to take me back into your world, but you did. And I don't think I ever understood what you were trying to build until now." I leaned back, studying her face. She was older now, like me, but in that moment, she looked more human than she ever had. "Rachel," I said, "you don't owe me thanks. You just finally saw what I saw all along." She smiled, but there was sadness in her eyes. "You're right," she said, "and I'm sorry it took me so long." She turned to leave, but before she did, she hesitated. "Can I ask you something?" I nodded. "If I hadn't left, do you think things would have been different?" I thought about it for a long moment. "No," I said finally. "Because if you hadn't left, I wouldn't have become who I am now. And maybe you wouldn't have either." She stood there quietly, then whispered, "I guess we both needed to break to find our edges." "Maybe," I said softly. "But the difference is, I built something from mine." She didn't respond. She just smiled faintly and walked out, her heels clicking softly against the floor until the sound faded down the hallway. After she left, I looked out the window at the city lights flickering against the dusk. It struck me how poetic it all was. The woman who once claimed she made me now working under my name. The empire I built with the same grit she once mocked. But it wasn't about payback anymore. It wasn't even about pride. It was about peace. I had proven everything I needed to, not just to her, but to the version of myself who used to beg for her approval. That man was gone. In his place stood someone who no longer needed validation. Someone who understood that strength isn't built on love or revenge, but on resilience. The next morning, Olivia stopped by my office with a file. "Rachel's resigning," she said. I looked up in surprise. She said she wants to start her own consulting business. "She asked me to tell you thank you." I nodded slowly, a small smile touching my lips. "Good for her." Olivia tilted her head. "You sure you're okay with that?" "I am," I said. "She's finally doing what she should have done all along, standing on her own." After Olivia left, I sat in silence for a while, thinking about how full the circle had become. The words Rachel had thrown at me that night echoed faintly in my mind. "Without me, you're nothing." I looked around my office, the walls lined with awards, the hum of a company alive with purpose, and smiled. "Without you," I whispered to the empty room, "I became everything." And maybe that was the real ending. Not revenge, not triumph, but transformation. Sometimes the best thing someone can do for you is underestimate you, because nothing fuels success like being told you'll never make it. The people who break you often become the reason you learn how to rebuild. As I looked out over the skyline one last time that day, I knew the story had come full circle. She walked away thinking she left me with nothing. But in truth, she gave me the one thing I needed most. The reason to become unstoppable. If you've ever been told you're not enough, that you'll fail without someone, remember this. Your story isn't over. It's just waiting for the chapter they'll never get to write. And if you felt this story hit a little too close to home, don't forget to subscribe, like, and leave a comment. Because sometimes silence is the loudest answer you can ever give. and success is the only revenge worth having.